You're listening to Cool Story, which is our stories, the best story, and the biggest story of the week. Today, we're going to be talking about women erased by history. Do you share your location with your partner, friends, and family? And AI in journalism and creative industries. Is this the end of the world? I'm Bri Bridie.
And I'm Bri Lee. Bridie, what have you been up to?
Well, this week, I haven't been up to that much because I had a wisdom tooth removal.
Wisdom teeth are rude.
Yes, and I got slightly scolded by the wonderful dental surgeon for being so old and getting them removed.
What do you mean? But don't they just burst? That's why they're so rude. They just burst out whenever they feel like it. Or have you delayed this? Have you been
Apparently it's been sitting there a while and I should have got it removed years ago and it was on the very edge of causing me a lot of trouble. But I'm not an anxious person at all. Actually, one of my friends jokes, and I'm the last millennial without anxiety.
Yeah, you're a unicorn.
But I have a lot of anxiety around tooth removal and the dentist, and this dental surgeon was amazing because when I went into her, I only needed to get one tooth removed and I told her I wanted to go under general anesthetic, which in hindsight, now that I've been through it, was an insane request. But she said to me, yep, if that's what you want, I'll do it. But I'm just going to walk you through what the procedure would be like and we can do it this way. I can try. And if it's too much and you freak out, I will stop straight away and then we'll just do it under general.
Wow.
Now, so she was great. I felt very listened to. She made me feel very comfortable. I think that she was lying to me when she said that she would stop halfway through if I didn't like it. But I just chose to believe that. And she told me to get a prescription for Valium from my doctor and take 2 half an hour before, which I did. And I got it out at 10:30 in the morning and I never usually take Valium. I don't take benzos, I don't vape, and I don't play the pokies because I know myself well. And if I did any of those things, I know that I would end up doing them all the time. So
what is it? Benzos, vaping, and pokies.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would love them too much. I know I would love all of those things too much. So I simply never, ever try them, touch them, do them. Anyway, I took but I can take Valium before the dentist, of course, that's fine. On doctor's orders, I'll take a benzo.
On doctor's orders, I will vape and play the pokies.
Yeah, I just need to find a doctor to tell me to play the pokies.
It's Sydney, Bridie, you can do it.
It was such a weird feeling to be high in the morning because I did feel really high when I took the 2 Valium and she was running slightly late. So I was sort of in the waiting room with Matt, my husband,
just blissed out.
Yeah, really. I was looking at him, telling him how much I loved him.
Such a good, quick segue, good sign of a healthy relationship. I do this too when I get really drunk. I just tell my partner how much I love him.
Yeah, it's so lame and so lovely.
I know.
But the dentist, and then I went in, it wasn't a wonderful experience, but it was fine. She ripped out my tooth. I wanted to keep it and I wasn't allowed.
What? No, you should.
Because it's contaminated. So she said, you've got little kids and this is contaminated. You shouldn't take it home. I said, okay, fine. I would have loved my big creepy tooth in my drawer though.
That reminds me of how David Sedaris got allowed to take his tumour home to feed it to a snapping turtle.
Yes, because he got some random to take it out.
That's right.
Remember, it was like a vet nurse he got to take it out.
I forgot about that minor detail.
Yeah. This was not a backyard operation. I could have taken my mum still has all my baby teeth. I could have given it to her.
Don't you find they look really creepy?
They're so creepy. And my mum also had 4 kids. She has 4 kids worth of baby teeth.
Do they all rattle around together or does she have them in separate jars?
I think she's got them in little separate pouches, but they're all in the same drawer. And she also has all our hair from first haircuts. Anyway, I digress. But the dentist told me something really interesting, which is that she sees all the time people in their 30s coming in really anxious about the dentist and tooth removal, and the vast majority of the time it's because of their mums. And I was anxious about it because of my mum, because my mum has always – she's a nurse and every other medical procedure has always been fine. She's cool. Operations, broken bones. Like she was so relaxed when I broke my arm at 11 that she looked at it and said, that's broken, but I'm not going back into the hospital. I'll take you tomorrow when I go back to work, and made me sleep the night with my broken arm.
I love that story.
Yeah.
So much.
I think that every nurse's kid can probably relate to that story. Unless they can see bone or you're not breathing, they don't care. But she had a lot of anxiety around the dentist, and she's always, said to me, if you're ever getting teeth out, never do it in the chair, always go under. It's a terrible experience. And that's why I was anxious about one being removed. And I thought it was really interesting when the dental surgeon said the vast majority of the time it's from mothers giving their kids dentist anxiety. And so she said to me after it was all done and I was fine, she was lovely. She said, now remember, you have to be good to your boys about this. You can't make your boys anxious about the dentist. How fascinating is that?
Bridie, the cycle of trauma stops with you.
Yeah, kids.
I can say that because
the dentist is cool. I love the dentist. Actually, when I got home and I told the boys about it, the dentist, Hamish was my oldest, who's 5, was like, the dentist took your tooth? And I said, yeah. And he goes, is a dentist a good guy or a bad guy? I said, a good guy. How can he be a good guy if he took your tooth?
From the mouths of babes.
And I was like, your thought process here is actually, it's very simple, but very, I can't really argue against it.
This has just reminded me, though, as well, not to make it super serious, but the fact that dental isn't covered by Medicare is still bonkers.
Oh, crazy.
Like, I just remember this tweet years ago, and it's lodged itself in my brain, that some dude was like, oh, according to my health insurance, teeth are luxury bones that don't get covered the way all my other bones get covered. And it's true.
I think that's part of why I've left this so long
Yeah.
and haven't been very regular with the dentist, because I always knew it was going to cost money.
Yep. I had to, I couldn't chew on the right-hand side of my mouth for 2.5 years because there was a crack that was, like, I just didn't chew on the right-hand side of my mouth. And there was a crack that formed when I was, like, in my early 20s back at uni, and couldn't afford to get anything done about it. So they just sort of put a filling when it really needed to be, like, whatever more significant done. And I finally, 2 years ago, was able to get private health insurance, and then had to wait a further 1 year waiting period for major dental before I could finally get a root canal and crown put on top. And by then it was like such an awful procedure, super horrific and cooked.
And you could have also made yourself so sick.
People get
if you got
so
an infection
sick
in that and it spreads to your jaw, that's when you were in big trouble.
Yeah. And it's like, if I have anything else go wrong in any other part of my body, I just rock up to the hospital and get it taken care of.
Yeah,
And
I
teeth
paid
are
like
just-
nothing to have babies. Almost all of it was free.
Yeah.
And getting stitched up, even I had to see specialists at certain points of both pregnancies, and I was in the public system both times, and both of it was free. Didn't see. The only bills I saw were for my GP who I chose, and that was fine. I trusted her, and that was all good. It wasn't super expensive. But then I had to fork out, 400? Oh, 450, but I think it's almost $1,000 all up by the end of it to get this tooth out.
Bridie, my root canal and crown was thousands.
Yeah, well, I've got to get $7,000. I don't want to think about this, but I've got to get $7,000 worth of work done at some point in the next couple of years. I know.
Yep.
But that's not as urgent as my tooth. But while I got to be on bed rest, which was like a little bit of a holiday, because after it didn't hurt too much and I wasn't that uncomfortable. So I kind of love an excuse to lie in bed for days at a time because it never happens anymore. And then I was also reading Wifedom by Anna Funder, which has just come out, nonfiction, it's written, I love the way it's written. It's actually quite experimental, and she's had to be a bit experimental because of the lack of sources around who she's writing about, which is Eileen Blair, George Orwell's wife.
How is it experimental? Is it not just a novel written from her perspective?
No, it's not fiction. It's not a novel.
But I swear I've heard her talk about having to sort of be creative.
And so she's creative in it. So it's not a novel, it's nonfiction. And she writes in first person sometimes. And she writes facts that we know, when she can find letters of Eileen. She quotes them, the biographical details of Eileen's life that she knows. And of course, we know tons and tons about George Orwell.
Yeah.
So
No, just call him George.
George, yeah, about George. So, which isn't even his real name.
No.
So that's all facts. And then where she does creative nonfiction and she writes in parts like it's a novel where she's had to fill in the gaps. So she knows, for instance, it's pretty amazing what George left out of his work and his writing about his wife, and also what his biographers have left out, his male biographers, who Anna says, you know, she's read all these biographies and she says, I think 2 to 3 of them are really wonderful biographies. They are good biographies. They just completely ignore the fact of George's wife. And it's really funny to read some of the excerpts that she puts in, because she writes about how 2 of the biographers note what an extraordinary period of creativity he had in his first year of marriage.
Oh, and then, what a clinky ding.
And then they speculate on why that is, and they don't realize or entertain the idea that it's because he has a woman looking after him, doing all the household tasks, doing the chores, editing him, typing up his notes and creating all the space for him to work. None of them entertain that idea. They have like weird other theories about why he might be so creative, and it's never the really obvious fact that he has a wife doing everything for him.
Like a administrative, creative and domestic assistant that is not
free.
Had to be paid for.
Yeah. And so...
Oh, Bridie, I'm so angry.
Yeah. You would love this book, but it's also... It's pretty funny to read about biographers just being so dumb.
Yes.
And they're really good biographers who've done this incredible amount of research, and then they just don't consider the space that is made for creativity by a wife. And so there's other things that we know, like when George was on the front in the Spanish Civil War, Eileen was actually working in the headquarters in Barcelona of POUM, which was the Spanish Communist Party that George was fighting for. And she was in the center of more action than he was. He actually had quite a boring time at the front, which he admits. He did get shot in the throat in the end.
All right, yeah. Well, but George can have.
But aside
shot
from that,
to the throat.
he writes. You know, there's a lot of waiting around, smoking ciggies, not seeing much action. Whereas Eileen was like running so much stuff for the party, organising packages, organising logistics, and was really deeply involved in the action, to the point that she was being spied on very heavily by other communists. And there's a event that happened where her officers got attacked by bombs and gunfire, and get this, it's by Russian communists. So it's not even fascists. It was like the communists fighting other communists. It's
communism.
Like, classic, yes. So it's like Stalin's communists were attacking. It was just ridiculous. We're attacking them. Anyway, it got firebombed, got shot up. George was in Barcelona at the time on leave, and he writes about hearing the gunfire, how he went to a theatre and slept the night, how he rang the headquarters and got onto one of the heads there, and he writes nobody was hurt. He never once wrote that his wife worked there, that those were her officers.
Where she was doing real significant work.
And being spied on and under a lot of pressure and terror. And so when he says nobody was hurt, I rang McNair. McNair said everything's fine, nobody has been hurt. What he's actually saying is his wife wasn't hurt, but he won't even write that. He won't even write that he was ringing to see if his wife was okay. That's how much he erased her from a lot of history. And then so Anna knows that she was there, and Anna can build a picture from other accounts and other people. But what she does in this creative nonfiction is then she writes novelistic passages where she imagines what Eileen was thinking and feeling and what Eileen did. And, you know, and so that's like the creative novel part of it.
Yep.
But broadly, it's a work of creative nonfiction.
God, no wonder when this even was starting to peep its head out as a coming release, people kept messaging me saying, have you read this yet? Have you read this yet? This sounds so good.
You would love it.
Well,
and
do you love it? Sorry,
what?
reading between the lines. Do you love it?
Yes. So I'm more than halfway through. Anna is an extraordinary writer and she's done incredible work here. And another thing that I I love in reading this book is that a lot of the details about Eileen that we know are because of her female friends.
Oh.
So they're from letters that she wrote to her best friend Nora and then being in contact. And they're from another female friend, Lydia, who was there the night that she met George, who never liked him.
There's always.
Always thought Eileen was too good for him.
She was.
And she recorded a lot and wrote a lot. And Anna doesn't say that explicitly yet, or maybe she does later in the book, but I'm very touched that what we do know about Eileen and what was recorded about her was
from the group chat.
Yeah. A lot.
From the girls.
From the group chat, from the girls. The girls are in there. The girls are giving us
History.
Eileen's life. There are some parts of the book at the beginning that I didn't love, which is when Anna reflects on her own circumstances and she's reflecting on patriarchy. That part is super interesting, how far back patriarchy reaches back, which is 10,000 years, how it basically does cross class and race and almost every culture in the world is touched by patriarchy. Almost every culture, not every culture, almost every culture is touched by patriarchy. I find that really interesting, but then she writes a little bit about how it applies to her life and her friends' life.
To Anna's life.
To Anna's
the
life.
Author, yeah.
Yes, and Anna's friend's life. And I'm quite unmoved by it because it's basically her writing about how there's super successful women, which I love, obviously. She's an extraordinary talent, an extraordinary writer. She writes about one of her friends being a very senior barrister and, very accomplished women and how they still do a lot around the home and do more than half the work. And to put it bluntly, I simply don't care about that.
Right.
Patriarchy is insidious. It does touch every single one of our lives in different ways, sometimes small, sometimes massive and devastating. And I just struggle to care that much about financially independent, well-off women picking up more of their housework at home. And I think at what point is it patriarchy? And I know patriarchy does play into it, but at what point do you have agency as well?
Oh my God. I cannot believe how much our two books speak to each other this week.
Really?
There are like 5 things you've said that I'm like, yep, in my book, that's a thing as well. Okay. I'm going to try and hold them in my head. So
you go. I'm finished now with my thoughts on life, which I do love overall.
Okay, good. So the book that I want to talk about is this, How to Think Like a Woman by Regan Penaluna. This is my ugly pre-release copy, which I've just brought in so you can see how fucking actively I was reading this book. This is the most exclamation points I have put in the margins of any book ever. And then this is the actual beautiful copy of what it looks like.
That is a gorgeous book.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. But okay, I'll get this out of the way first. I think it's not a good title. How to Think Like a Woman, compared to I adore this book. I love it so much, and I almost didn't read it because that title turned me off so much.
Why is that? Why were you turned off?
Well, How to Think Like a Woman, I'm like, I don't want to think like a woman, but that sounds I don't know, it made me cringe.
It sounds very 2010 girl boss feminism.
Yes, thank you. Yes, yeah, okay.
How to Be a Woman by Caitlin Moran.
Yes, yeah. Okay, anyway. So the first thing I want to raise is this phrase that it taught me. So we all know what the male gaze is, right? That's a term that we've sort of had in common parlance for a while. But this book taught me this new term called the male glance, which I just had this, I'm going to read out 3 or 4 sentences that sort of explain what it is, and I'm reading verbatim from the book. But when I first read this, I had a full body moment of recognition and this bush, my professional life flashing before my eyes of all the moments that I had felt this. Penaluna is the author of this book, but the male glance is a term that Penaluna found in an article by critic Lily Loughborough. So I'm reading now verbatim from Penaluna's book. Not to be confused with the male gaze, which objectifies women's bodies, the male glance does the opposite to women's creative work. It barely gives it a second look. Those under its spell decide after cursory examination that the work in question isn't of much value. The glance, quote, looks, assumes, and moves on. It is, above all else, quick. Under its influence, we rejoice in our distant diagnostic speed. It feeds an inchoate, almost erotic hunger to know without attending, to omnisciently not attend, to reject without taking the trouble of analytical labor. It turns away without a care. And I just read that and I was like, how it just captures how so many women's, not only I would say creative work, but any kind of work, any kind of intellectual and or creative endeavors, this inclination that people have, in particular men, but of course we can like internalize the male glance as much as we can internalize the male gaze, to just in the true meaning of the word glance, to like a glancing blow, like to just look and dismiss, and the kind of feeling of superiority and power that comes from not even sitting with what has been created and offered to you, but just being able to dismiss it outright because of some innate, not even spoken like belief in the inferiority of what has been offered to you. It's just, does that not hit you?
It absolutely hits me. And it's one of those moments of something being articulated,
yes,
that you have felt so deep down. And I would apply that even, obviously it goes to women's creative work and how it is treated. I can see that so much, the male glance being cast over so many women's creative work. And I would say it also extends to women's interests.
Yes.
And I have felt the male glance, just thinking out loud and only just first encountering it now with you, the first thing that took me to was not so much how some of my work has been treated, although it almost certainly has been treated by the male glance, but how I feel sometimes discussing my interests, musical, books, even theatre, and how they can be dismissed by the male. And the male glance is exactly how they're dismissed by some of the men in my life.
Yep. So this book, I should explain what the heck this is even about. That was like one of about a dozen, like I feel like huge things that I got out of this book. And broadly speaking, it's a combination of both philosophy. You know, Penaluna is an extraordinary thinker and got her sort of PhD in philosophy. But the philosophy that's in here is certainly written for a general audience. It's not inaccessible, I would say, at all to any kind of normal reader. And it sort of tells the dual stories of the author, Penaluna's personal, difficult journey through academia and how extremely patriarchal, in particular, the philosophy departments in academia are, and also her sort of personal life at that time, the gradual failure of her marriage because of these issues, told in very, I would say, very self-aware and very reflective, clear, simple writing that I just was like drinking it in. But then also the tagline for it is "For women philosophers who taught me how to live a life of the mind." The second sort of layer to the book, apart from Penaluna's own life over, I would say, 4 or 5, maybe plus years, is how philosophy as a discipline has worked deliberately over centuries to just crush and erase the contributions of women. And there's this dual thing happening where, because of the sort of pragmatic reality of women's lives in every single generation until now, and arguably, depending on class and other intersections of identity still now, women can't be philosophers because they're stuck at home and they're not allowed at work. Like there are, you know, very real barriers to accessing that professional and intellectual landscape for women. But there are also examples at every stage of history where women actually are there doing really extraordinary, incredible work. And Penaluna just tracks how that work is deliberately erased in every sort of, you know, compendium that you get in a bookstore that's like 100 thinkers that defined Western thought now, and they just deliberately ignore, they glance over and deliberately erase all of the extraordinary women who have made significant contributions. And there are even examples in here of like really famous philosophers like Locke, who in their own time were talking about how they co-authored certain huge philosophical treatises with women, and then within a single generation, nobody knows that woman's name anymore. And it just paints such a compelling and fucking infuriating picture of how it takes every generation after generation of like enablers to keep this narrative of male genius to the exclusion of all other genius going. It's just such a good book. I fucking loved it.
It's just so sad because enablers, yes, but also particularly what Wifedom is opening my eyes up to is it's not just women being ignored or dismissed. It's all the times they're deliberately erased, and you used that word before. And when you first started talking about philosophy and how it's dominated by men, because I've been reading Wifedom and it is actually changing the way that I'm looking and thinking about a lot of stuff, even though I think of myself as quite educated in feminist history and rhetoric and thinking, and you think you were past all that and then you still learn something new. And when you were talking about philosophy being patriarchal and dominated by men, because I'm reading Wifedom, the first thought I had when you started talking was dominated by men, or have the women just been erased? Like the women, I'm sure there were women there doing the work and they've just on purpose been left out of a lot of stuff, which is what you got to. But what a way to open up history, but also incredibly sad, incredibly frustrating, because it is really difficult to get a lot of that work back.
Yes.
Like, you know, as I was talking, if you were raised by a man, as Eileen was by her own husband, it's been incredibly difficult for Anna to find her work and find out about her life and find the details. You know, once you were raised, it's a lot of hard work to get it back. And it also makes me think about all the women for who the erasure was completely successful.
Oh,
and
God,
deep thinkers, interesting women who have been successfully erased, who will never hear about or know their work.
What a devastating phrase, a completely successful erasure. And especially I find it very upsetting in a situation like George and Eileen when it's also their partner.
Yes.
Like there's some added level of bastardry or something, like cruelty I think is more what I mean. Like
cruelty is the word, especially when George was a writer who was exposing deep dark truths about the class system, politics, and was seen to be speaking up for people who we didn't usually hear their stories or know about their lives, like such as homeless people. He actually did a lot of writing on that. Homeless people in England and Paris.
Down and Out is an extraordinary book.
And so he's standing up for all these oppressed people.
Yep.
And then at the same time, they're doing exactly that to the woman he's living with.
Yeah, that's what I would say the final thing I want to rave about with Penaluna's book. I think it spoke to me really deeply because there are some analogy, like her frustrations with philosophy, which she articulates so well, are quite analogous to some of my frustrations with law and like legal thinking and the legal industry, where there is this like irony at the rot of the profession or sort of area of inquiry, or however you want to sort of phrase what philosophy or law is. This sort of rot of irony where all of these people who practice in this area are trying to ask questions such as, how should a person be, and what makes a good human, and what are there sort of certain natures about humanity, and how can we be good humans to each other, and is equality what the thing that we should be aiming for? And posing these questions that are trying to achieve some sense of like clarity and objectivity about human nature. And while they are asking those questions, are just en masse completely denying the humanity of anyone that doesn't look and sound exactly like them. And it's just so analogous to the frustrations I have with law, where so many lawyers claim a higher capacity than the average human to be able to sort of think clearly or analyze a circumstance objectively and know what a reasonable man is. And so many people in the legal profession refuse to acknowledge that what the law is might be affected by who the law is done by. Like, it is so subjective, and they are so blinded by their own arrogance. And it's just like how you can expect to get some extraordinary level of clear thinking such that it brings us genuine, exciting insight that might further our capacity for thinking and feeling humanity when you are such an asshole and so blinkered. She just goes into that so well and skewers it. And you know this thing, I'm sure you have it too sometimes, where when you're a writer and you're reading something that someone else has written and you're like, oh, that's what I wish I'd written. But I ain't even mad because it's so good.
Oh, yes, exactly. Or I've thought this for years.
Yeah, but I couldn't say it.
I would never have thought to say it this way.
In that way. Yeah.
Or you imagine, damn, give me another 12 months and I would have said it in that way. That could have been me. I read this week, I did send you this article, but I didn't.
Bridie has deliberately kept her innermost thoughts about this subject from me.
I don't know exactly how Bri's going to react, but I had a sense, and I thought this would be a very fun conversation to have on mic. So I sent the article from New York Times to her. The headline is, I love you, let's stalk each other. And it is about the phenomenon of friends and family and lovers, I guess, and lots of people sharing their locations with each other. It mainly happens on iPhones, on Apple devices, although you can have location sharing apps on any phone. But it's built into the Apple iPhones. Apple first built it, from my reading, for, they thought it would be used by parents and kids kind of thing, like track your year 7 kid getting home safe. And it has exploded in a way that they didn't predict, in that lots of people are just sharing their locations with lots of random people in their life. And this article goes into that, like sisters sharing locations, friends sharing locations with each other. I will note it is end-to-end encrypted on the Apple iPhone, so Apple can't see your location.
Allegedly.
Apple does, yeah, allegedly.
Allegedly.
Even though your phone is listening to you at all times.
Yes.
But it is end-to-end encrypted. But all the surveillance stuff, let's just put that to the side and think about the fun thing of always knowing exactly where your friend is at all times.
Just that small detail of mass data surveillance.
Bri, I feel like I already know the answer to this question. Do you share your location with anyone?
Fuck no. What the fuck? This article, I have never felt so old in my life than when I read this article. I really can't say to you. It was like I manifest my octogenarian self being like, the kids have got it wrong.
How many people do you think I share my location with?
Okay, well, I mean, maybe all of your siblings. I can imagine your siblings, and like you have a very much more fun and conversational and constantly engaged level of communication with your immediate family than I think is common. Yes. So I can imagine with all of your immediate family. And then maybe with some of your more like fun / unhinged friends, I'll give you 3 to 4 of those. So what are we looking at total here? Like maybe a dozen?
So I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. So those are my siblings, my 3 younger siblings, and I have a mum and a dad, and we are all very close. Sometimes too close. We are all very enmeshed and in constant communication with each other, which also means constant arguments with each other. And yes, I do have some unhinged friends. So I share my location with 14 people.
Oh, I guess 12.
I'm impressed that you guessed so close. And I love it. I love sharing locations. And my brother shares locations. If my brother met you, Bri, at the pub, he would just be like, Bri, do you want my location? And he would just share it with you. He shares his location. I once looked. He shares his location with more than 40 people.
What the fuck?
And they don't all share back with him.
See, that's...
He fully just, he's like, have my location to anyone he's hanging out with. He's very funny, although he is one of the most boring people that I share locations with because he basically just goes to work and goes home, goes to work and goes home. He works in a hospital. He's a nurse, although his location is interesting at the moment because he's overseas. I look at it, my Find My Friends app multiple times a day. And
What?
Multiple times a day. It's one of the first apps I look at in the morning and see where everyone is.
What the this is one of those moments, Bridie, where I realize that I have no idea how other people think or live.
I love looking. I'm like, oh, they're at the shops. Oh, they're at work. Oh, they're going to the beach today. And you know what I love? I love at nighttime when everyone's in Australia, because they're not always in Australia, but when everyone's in Australia, I love at 10 o'clock at night looking at Find My Friends and seeing my brother and my sisters and my dad and my unhinged friends all tucked up in their beds at home.
Okay, this is what you have just expressed to me is the only part of the article where I was like, okay, I can appreciate that people felt like it was a moment of connection that didn't require activity on either part.
You do feel connected to each other.
Yeah.
You know, you get funny little messages. My dad loves tracking our location. So I share with my dad. And it's funny that you mentioned my siblings first up because the very first people I started doing this with was my brother and my sisters.
Can I just interrupt
And then
you
it went out to my unhinged friends.
Here to ask, would you be one of the parents who want their kids to use it?
No. I've thought about this a lot, and I don't want I don't think I will use it. You know, you can have lots of high and mighty ideas about parenting before you get to certain stages, but I have thought about this a lot, and I wouldn't want my kids to share their locations with me when they are tweens and teenagers, because I want to give them my trust and a level of freedom. And when I'm sharing my location with my dad, I didn't start sharing my location with my dad until I was in my 30s.
Yeah, he's not worried if you're really at that party with that boy.
And you know what? But it's funny because I do party and he does see me out at 4 a.m. And it's funny when he makes comments about it. So that's fine. And, and I'm doing it for fun. And I understand why parents have their teenage kids and tweens share their location with them. I am sympathetic to it, but I wouldn't do it myself because I think you've just got to give your kids a level of trust. That's how they learn to grow up. You have to take them at their word, trust them that when they say they're going to come straight home, they're going to come straight home. And also, this is easy for me to say when they're 5 and 3, but give them the space to play up as well. You have to give them the space to be a bit naughty or, be separated from you and all that kind of thing. But I hope mostly it's just trust and that they will feel comfortable telling me what they're doing and where they are and do what they say they're going to do. So no, I won't do it with my kids, but I do it with my dad and my siblings.
I think maybe now that I think about it, even the title of this article about let's stalk each other and this theme of surveillance, as someone who even has a small degree of a minuscule in the scheme of things degree of fame, but I get stopped in the street sometimes and it's always very lovely and flattering. But at one stage in my professional life, which I won't go into now, it for about a year I had a stalker. And that combined with feeling sometimes if I'm out at the pub or just in the supermarket and someone does a double take at me and then I have this moment where I'm like, am I gaslighting myself or did that person actually just recognize me? And then the number of times, one time I got off an airplane and someone had Instagram DM'd me saying, oh, I was just on your flight from Adelaide to Sydney. And I was like, oh, I thought I felt something. I should have trusted my gut. The feeling, I think maybe I'm hypersensitive following those types of things to feeling surveyed, feeling like I can't just be living my life without eyes on me. I don't want eyes on me. And then I just think about how much a tool like this would be so cooked in any kind of even slightly controlling or not totally healthy and functional relationship.
Oh, absolutely. It can be abused.
Because then it's
But I feel like Apple tags you would use for abusive behavior more than Find My Friends.
Yeah, but that's why I said even slightly dysfunctional or unhealthy, because it's such a spectrum. You can, there could be a partner who is just, it's not even a full-blown sort of coercive control thing. It's just a fucking like asshole way to guilt trip you if you ever switch it off. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just, it makes me really uncomfortable, and I find it hard to imagine how the pros could outweigh the cons with something like this.
Well, I've been doing it for years and it's super fun.
Yeah.
I recently got one of my friends to share her location. There's like a group of 4 of us that hang out quite a lot. One of them never used location services and the rest of us do. And so this sounds bad when I say force. We didn't force her, but we encouraged her to share her location with us, and we shared ours with her. And she's addicted within a month. Like,
if you don't do it, you're not cool.
She'd never been into it before, and now she like messages all the time, and she's like, this is actually so fun. I thought it was weird. So maybe we should just try some together, Bri. You can decide if you like it or not.
Bridie, I'm looking you in the face and telling you I am never switching on Find My Friends.
But the feeling surveilled, I don't have as high a profile as you, but do have a profile. And also I think that another element of that is being 2 quite distinctive looking people as well. Like I feel like we're both very easy to recognize.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get recognized as much as you, but I did get recognized quite a lot a few years ago when I was doing lots of TV, yeah.
TV does it. It's
TV. Like, as soon as you're on TV, that's when you get recognized. And I always had fun mostly being recognized. But I was at the pub with my bestie Georgia and Maddie, my husband, and I could feel this table looking at me like all through the evening. I could feel them looking over at me, and they were like men, I think maybe in their 30s, and they kept looking over, and I could feel it. I didn't mind that much, but I clocked it, and I thought, oh, they're looking at me. And they're going to recognize me. And it was kind of at the beginning of when I started to be recognized, so it was a little bit of a novelty. After about an hour, one of the guys comes up and he's like, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just had to ask. And I was like, yes, like, sitting up straighter, waiting for it as a newly famous person. And he said, are you Annabelle Crabb? Love Annabelle. She's like 15 years older than me. And also looks nothing like me. We both have curly brown hair. That's it.
I was about to say, it's not even about the age to me at all. It's about the fact that you look completely
different. And then Anne, because I'd been so kind of smug with my back up, my husband was like falling off his chair laughing. He loved it so much. Because he was with me the first time I got recognized, and I got recognized by someone who had actually seen me on stage doing a funny story thing. And she came up to me in the city and she was like, oh my God, are you Bridie Jabor? And I was like, yes. And then she said, oh, I saw you on stage last week. I loved you. You were so funny. And, I was loving it. Great, cool. I was in my 20s at this stage, and like mid to late 20s. And then she walked away, and Matt had to put up with me for the next hour being like, excuse me, are you Bridie Jabor?
Do you know?
Well, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And Matt was just like, oh my God, kill me now. Could you be more full of yourself? Anyway, so that was my surveillance. So but it was kind of good that happened near the beginning with the Annabelle thing, because I think it made me less paranoid, because now when people look at me, which doesn't happen as much as it used to, but when it does, I just think they probably just think I'm Annabelle Crabb. Because it's that thing of seeing my face and knowing I'm familiar, I think, but not being able to place me, and then just thinking of the actually famous lady with curly brown hair.
Yeah. Well, on tech news, something that we wanted to talk about too, which I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about, especially because you're much more, I mean, there are lots of similarities in the types of work we do, but one of the differences, I think, is that you're much more like news and newsroom. I've worked
in newsrooms for 17 years now. I've worked in a newsroom, well, various different newsrooms.
Yes. So we want to talk about how news came out this week that, especially in regional news centres, they've been using AI to write hyper-specific local stories, which then just get kind of overviewed and signed off on by a real human being, but it's thousands of stories every week being generated.
Yeah, so it was said at a conference overseas, Michael Miller, one of the biggest dogs at News Corp,
And we should say it's specifically News Corp.
Yeah, and it's happening in other, CNET, it just got revealed we're using AI to write lots of articles absolutely riddled with errors. So it's not just News Corp, but it's significant because it's someone going on the record about how they're using AI, and a lot of newsrooms are struggling at the moment with how they're going to use it. Are they going to use it? What are the ethics around it? I know in particular, New York Times, ABC, The Guardian are all thinking deeply about this and issuing guidelines. And News Corp have gone on the record and said that they are publishing up to 3,000 articles a week generated by AI, which is an extraordinary amount of articles. They said that it's overseen by someone, but it would have to be overseen. If they're being overseen and checked, it would have to be by more than one person, because one person can't check 3,000. Even if they're short 100-word articles, that's still a lot to be checking.
This is what I thought was so cooked about it, was that they said, because it's specifically about these really hyperlocal regional titles, and that News Corp has launched 24 in just recent years. And the titles are staffed by a single journalist and are typically in regions with a population of 15,000 or more. And this is what Miller said at this conference. If that single journalist can generate 7 new subscriptions a week, then their salary is covered.
Yeah, so getting seven
subscribers and by churning out the AI stories.
Well, and interesting in that as well was 55% of subs to News Corp, 55% are driven by hyperlocal subs, which actually makes me a little bit sad, because there's such a hunger and a demand for local news. And instead of them being served properly and with newspapers, we've seen all those hundreds of newspapers shut down in the past 3 years. I'm quite intimate, I guess, with this in a way, because the Daily Examiner, the newspaper of my hometown in Grafton, was shut down, and it's been pretty devastating for the community not having a source of local news. And there's a lot that happens in the area, particularly around council, that should be recorded
and reported
on objectively by someone, and there's just not many people there doing that job or doing the news. So I looked up some of these. They don't label what articles are AI, but they did say it was mostly traffic reports and court lists.
And they said it was weather, petrol prices.
Yeah, petrol prices was one.
Yeah.
They said weather, but I could not find any weather articles that I thought were written by AI. I did find traffic reports and fuel prices and court lists, which I thought were very obviously written. They're not labeled, but very obviously. This is one. The average price of unleaded petrol in Clarence Valley this afternoon was 188 cents a litre. Everyday News Local tracks local fuel prices so that you know when and where you are paying too much. The cheapest petrol at 12:07 p.m. today, according to Fuel Check, was 179.5 cents a litre.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get it. So it's not particularly compelling. What that would do, that would drive clicks, because people would click on what's the cheapest fuel and what's the traffic news for my area. But I also, reading that, don't think that it's taking away significant jobs from human beings, because I think that whether there was AI or not writing up these traffic incidences or their petrol, there still wouldn't be a local newspaper in that town at this point.
But this is what I wanted to ask you about, because as a freelancer, there were so many crappy, anonymous copywriting gigs that I did back when I was living in Brisbane, broke as fuck, in a 5-person share house. I get paid to write the most inane copy for some company that, for whatever reason, had been convinced that they needed to have a blog on their website. And I would get paid to write 600 words about blah, blah, blah. And when I found out about sort of ChatGPT and the sort of progress that AI technologies have made, especially for writing prompts in the last sort of 6 months or so, the first thing I thought about was that entire revenue stream that sort of kept me afloat for a year or two could and probably should have been done better by an AI system. But now is not an option for people at the very starts of their careers. I got asked a lot in the last 6 months by people who know me and in professional settings whether or not, as a writer, I was worried about AI, quote unquote, taking my job? And the answer is, for me personally, not anymore, because like Bri Lee is a name now. Like I have multiple books. I have relationships with editors. I have many projects on the go. I've already sort of cut through that really like emerging stage of my career. But I think ChatGPT for various parts of journalism and writing is going to take a lot of work from like cadets and from first 5 years freelancers.
I think when ChatGPT first came out and I was reading about and looking into what it can do, one of the first thoughts I had was this is completely devastating for the copywriting industry.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who earn their living copywriting and obviously, like you said, can be vital to the beginning stages of a writer's career. I can't see it being that devastating for journalism because journalism has already been devastated by the internet.
It can't go get any worse.
Honestly, I don't think that AI will take any... It's not going to be the end of cadets because cadets have essentially already finished.
Yeah.
You know, cadets just aren't hired. Like newsrooms have been decimated. So many journalism jobs have already gone and it's simply because all the ad money has dried up. There is still, you're still going to want to have cadets because there's work that cadets do that AI could just never do. You know, I wrote traffic reports. I wrote court lists when I was a cadet. I did a cadetship, which is rarer and rarer these days for someone to have done a cadetship. And I started it straight out of school as well. I was doing uni at the same time, but it's extremely rare now for that to happen. And I feel very lucky I had that experience. When I was a cadet, I was doing those jobs such as doing the court list, writing up surf reports that was so boring that I used to put star signs in the surf reports.
What?
So to have fun with it because I was so bored because that was like an evening shift job when you worked like 1 p.m. till 9 p.m. On that you would have to do during that you have to do the surf report and it was so repetitive and I'd have to ring up someone and say, what's the surf going to be tomorrow? Like, what are the tides? And they're like, the tide peaks at this. The surf will be about like 3.5 foot. And then so I would write it out. It was only like 100 words, if that. But I got so bored with this repetitiveness and doing that I would write like the surf is going to be 6 foot. If you're a Gemini, expect someone to reveal their true self in this. And I would make little jokes in it and then see if the subs would pick up. And I got them published sometimes. Like if I had someone subbing that who was funny, they would put it in the paper and it was like this little game I was playing. I know you're dying now because of how unprofessional that is.
No.
In my defense, I was 18.
I've done way more unprofessional stuff.
And so I would do that. So I don't really mind. Like if AI was doing that, I would still have that cadetship because the main thing that I did as a cadet was go out and do like the filler stories for the middle of the paper. So do little profiles on community people, go to people's houses, interview them about winning a trophy. And then the incredibly messed up thing that I did as a cadet, which almost all cadets did, was went to fatal car accidents. So it was my job to sit in the scanner room and listen to the scanner. And if there was a really bad accident, and this was on the Gold Coast, so there were a fair few accidents, I would be sent out to the fatal accident to report it. And AI obviously can't do that. But that's a whole other issue about, I reflect back on that. At the time, I loved my job. I enjoyed it. And I loved my time at the Gold Coast Bulletin. I learned so much there and I'm forever grateful for it. And this isn't something that's just unique to the Gold Coast Bulletin. This happens in cadets across almost every tabloid in the world where, you know, I look back and think, I can't believe you were I was a kid and you were sending me out to these accidents. And yeah, it blows my mind. Like I saw one of my first dead bodies and he was 19 and he died on a motorcycle accident. And the next day they sent me out to knock on the door of his parents' house and ask them if they wanted to like tell his story, you know, for a story in the paper. That's more what I reflect on as a cadet and how I was used as a cadet rather than just writing up the surf reports and the traffic reports. And that was hectic, but and is a whole other ethical discussion. But my broader point is that cadets aren't just they're not just hired to do the surf reports and the fuel tracking and whatever. You are actually making phone calls. And this is why I'm less alarmed about broadly AI in journalism in general. And I don't think it's going to devastate the industry like it could devastate some others, because so much of journalism is ringing people up, and AI cannot ring someone up. And even when you do a weather story, if you're doing an interesting weather story, you ring up the bomb and you ask them the right questions. When is it going to get hotter? When is it going to get colder? How long has it been since you've seen something like this? You know, and how does this fit into a broader trend?
Legwork.
Yeah. And you've got to take down the quote. So one, you've got to ask the questions, get on the blower, which an AI is just, well, I don't think ever going to do, get on the blower. 2, ask the right questions. And 3, news sense. Look at that and pick out what is the interesting point here. And I think like an AI, I don't think they can write a summary of maybe a press conference, but I don't think people realize how much boring things journalists listen to.
Yeah, that's true.
To pick out the one interesting thing and to pick out what the news line is. And I just can't see AI being trained to do that. Another interesting aspect of AI is, you know, it's basically a text predictor. It goes through the internet and it puts everything that humans have written and then uses that to predict what they would say in a sentence. So that's how it writes articles. The funny thing about AI writing more articles is then that AI will be learning off AI and that just leads to more mistakes.
Yeah.
So I don't feel that alarmed by AI, but it's probably in journalism specifically, but it's for the depressing reason that journalism has already been.
Yeah. I guess what I would add to that, like, and that's a very good and like specific articulation that people like need to remember that it's not just writing. Like writing doesn't mean anything. Like copywriting compared to journalism are like 2 completely different industries and crafts and require different skills and expertise. If I was a copywriter, I would be concerned. But I think as well, even if it's in journalism or different areas of writing, when I think about like the strikes currently happening in America and now the actors are striking as well as the writers, one of the big things they're striking about is that they're trying to get the executives and companies, the big production companies, to agree not to use AI to generate scripts. And I just think there is a way in which I can imagine for certain types of so-called like creative content, like a sitcom, like something that has a sort of recurring format every week. Whereas what you had to do pre-AI was pay writers for the kind of getting together brainstorming room, then for the development room, then for the like actual people draft time. And then they come back together and they compare their drafts and they develop together depending on those drafts and then they polish and blah, blah, blah. I can very much imagine, and this is why I think it will be one of the huge sticking points in the strike where neither side is willing to give. I can imagine that to an executive, well, if we've already got 6 seasons of, I don't know, like Grey's Anatomy, if we've got 6 seasons of Grey's Anatomy, why can't we feed those 6 seasons into an AI, get the AI to generate 100 script options, and then only pay actual human beings for the final 20% of that normal gigantic pipeline? Get somebody in at the end where you still need that bit of human touch. You still need that like creativity or that ingenuity or just that analysis or insight or experience, whatever that special thing is that you only get from like years of doing a job and honing your craft. We acknowledge that that is required, but it's certainly not required for 100% of the time. It is now only required for the final 20% of the time. That's how I see this sort of terrifying future that people are afraid of where like machines replace human beings.
Oh yeah, totally.
That's what I think is just this sort of bulk generative time that in my experience, people who are not the creatives have always resented creatives for needing brainstorming and drafting time. They just don't. They hate having to pay someone to just think.
And here is a thought exercise that I have been thinking about a lot, particularly in the wake of the writers' strike in America. Because I'm not that alarmed for journalism, it doesn't mean I don't think that AI could take a lot of people's jobs. In creative industries. Why is it okay to automate car manufacturing and factory work, but not to automate creative work?
Yep.
Do you have thoughts?
Off the top of my head, I would say it's something to do with the way we usually delineate between manual and non-manual labor. And this is something I was about to say, we mentioned in a previous episode. This is something we spoke about in a pilot test run we did, where I think one of the final, not bastions, but one of the final delineations when we talk about class in the 21st century is whether or not you have a choice to do something that like prematurely degrades your body. Like whether or not you have a choice to do something that within 3 decades will wreck your back. And so it's not just like laborers in the traditional sense, but it's also often like childcare or aged care workers, and it's sex workers, and it's clean, like, you know, high turnover cleaners and things where because we have tradies where people get paid, in Australia in particular, lots of tradespeople get paid, rightfully so, really good money to do that work, and they choose to do that work. It's not the same if you know that you are choosing to do manual labor because you enjoy it and it pays well. I'm talking about people who like can't afford not to do labor that wrecks their bodies. I think that for me is like still a huge big distinction in class. And I think that there's some terrible thing that then happens there where, because we presume that nobody could possibly want to sort of work on the type of factory line that a machine could do instead of them, we have less sadness or less empathy at the idea that that person would then have to find another job.
Yes. Where I land with it is technology is meant to make our life better and easier.
Yeah.
So when you're automating a factory line, what should have happened and what didn't happen is that human beings get to work 3 days a week.
Yes.
Instead of 5 days a week.
Yep.
And get all that leisure time. So technology should be about making our lives better so that we work less, so that we can have more leisure time. The whole point of being alive, to have time with which you can enjoy yourself.
To have a sick one.
Yeah, to have a sick one. My guiding life philosophy, to have a sick one. And technology is just not making our life better. Instead, lots of people are working more with less secure conditions and for less money. This is not the future we were promised.
No.
Why don't we have like AI that can suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere and clean our houses and do all that boring stuff while
cleaning your house. Like cleaning house is a manual labor job that is often.
But we should have machines that can clean our house while no human suffers a reduction in their life conditions. Like it should be that, well, if you wanted to clean your house, you can, obviously, but
weirdo.
Some people enjoy it. Actually, my dad, I think, is one of those people, and my brother. It should be like we should be getting more money or, you know, working less for the same amount of money or even more. That's how technology should be working for us. And instead it is just leaving us broadly across almost all industries in worse working conditions. And because of technology, particularly in creative industries, even before AI, technology has just encroached even more on our leisure time.
Yes.
There is like less of a delineation between your work time and your pleasure time, and it just sucks.
Yeah,
This
agreed.
is not what we should be using our technology for.
This is the thing I kept coming back to when they were protesting in France about the retirement age going up as well, is that like with all of the extraordinary progress we've made to like average life expectancy and how devastating it is that every time on average we can live a year older, apparently it just means that we have to work for another year.
Yeah,
instead
exactly.
of having time at the end of our lives to have a sick one. All right, we should end there.
We should. What are you going to get up to this week? What are you looking forward to?
In news that will surprise a lot of people, myself most of all, I have become interested in the soccer.
Welcome to being a sports fan.
I watched the Matildas kick Canadians' ass 4-0 and experienced a real rush that was more than what I was expecting. And I am currently waiting with bated breath because one of my mates thinks that he might be able to get me a ticket to the Matildas game on Monday night.
Oh my God, amazing.
Which would be, yeah. My friend Katrina and I were talking to each other about how emotional we get when we see men or like people in general, but especially men, because young men in particular are like really taking up the like ticket purchasing and watching of the Women's World Cup on at the moment. Like men just like cheering on women and like admiring women just doing something good. Like I get emotional and excited when I look at the fact that every single Matildas game now in Australia is sold out. And I think it was like Channel 7 or Channel 9 said that one of the last Matildas games was their single biggest stats of like watchership, whatever, like
so more
audience.
than 4 million people. More than 4 million people. That is incredible for a country of like 25 million.
Yeah. And what I reflect upon and I think why I'm so keen on it is that when I watch a Matildas game now, all of the people playing that game started getting serious about their training well before there was this level of support. Think about what the game is going to be like in another decade when all of the young kids now are like actually encouraged and actually supported both kind of spiritually, emotionally, and also like pragmatically and financially to get good at this game and to build a culture and community around it. I feel I'm keen. I'm into it. And so my fingers and toes are crossed. I might be there at the game on Monday night.
I just love seeing the thrill and community of sport opening up to more and more people. I really do.
Yeah.
I love it because I'm already a sports fan. Not really of soccer football in particular, although it is the game I know the rules the best in. But I just love seeing people get together to enjoy sport because it truly is one of the great joys in life. But what I'm looking forward to this week is hopefully on Saturday I'm going to be able to eat a steak. Because my tooth has still been healing. And I didn't get a steak the night before and I wanted to. So that's my thing to look forward to this week. Hopefully a steak on the weekend.
Well, good luck on your journey back to mastication.
You want to hear a cool story? Find us wherever you get your podcasts.